Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today is, well, pretty straightforward. We're cutting through the noise around Viatris, Inc. That's ticker symbol VTRS.
Right.
This is one of the biggest players in the generic drug world, and the sources we've got in front of us, they present, an absolute paradox for anyone looking at this stock.
They really do.
Okay, so here's the core tension we really need to unpack. As of November 11th, 2025, the stock is trading, below its fair value estimate. We're talking about $11.20 versus a $13 estimate. So that suggests it's potentially undervalued, a small value stock. But, and this is the big, but at the same time, analysts give Viatris an economic moat of none?
Then zero.
And an uncertainty rating of very high. So how can a giant company be both cheap and, well, so structurally unsound? We have to figure out what's driving that risk.
And that paradox is, it's really built right into the company's DNA. Viatris was only formed back in November 2020.
Not that long ago.
Not at all. It was a merger of two massive entities. Upjohn, which was Pfizer's off-patent drug division, and Milan, a huge generic and specialty manufacturer.
So a behemoth was created.
Instantly. A global behemoth that services over 165 countries. But that very structure, that post-merger structure, is now the source of its problems. So our deep dive is really about understanding why, 4 years later, this company with immense scale still has no real advantage.
Okay, so if you look at Viatris's core business, their revenue, it's not just a pure generics play.
Not even close.
Roughly 40% of their sales come from those standard generics and biosimilars, but the other 60%, the majority,
Yeah.
comes from this huge portfolio of off-patent branded legacy products.
These are the names you know. The massive Pfizer drugs that went off patent. We're talking about Lipitor, Lyrica, Norvasc, even Viagra.
So that 60-40 split means Viatris is basically managing a huge portfolio of, well, older medicines.
Exactly. They are not chasing the cutting edge here. They're focused on extending the life and the profitability of these really mature assets. And we just saw this struggle play out in the Q3 2025 earnings.
Yeah, the numbers were not great.
Revenue growth was barely there, 0.2% year over year. And if you adjust for divestitures, they were actually down 1% organically.
That near stagnation is alarming. 4 years after a massive merger, you'd expect to see some real synergies. What's holding them back?
It's like an internal tug of war. Viatris's operations are all segmented, and they are seeing some strength in their legacy branded stuff, especially in emerging markets in China.
Okay, so there's a bright spot.
There is, but that stability is being used to counteract these just disastrous headwinds on the generic side of the business.
How bad is it?
In developed markets, generics were down substantially, about 8% operationally. So they're in this constant battle where the intense price erosion in their core generic business is basically eating up all the growth they can squeeze out of their legacy brands elsewhere.
And this brings us to the single biggest, most quantifiable risk that's feeding that very high uncertainty rating right now.
Yeah.
It's coming directly from their manufacturing.
The Indore facility in India.
A major issue.
Correct. And this wasn't just some minor compliance problem. It led to a major import alert from the FDA.
And that alert forced Viatris to do what exactly?
It forced them to suspend sales of 7 critical products, most of which get shipped right to the very lucrative U.S. market.
We need to underline the financial gravity of this. One of those suspended products is lenalidomide, and that one's responsible for most of the damage. The analysts are saying this one facility issue is going to create a $500 million revenue headwind.
$500 million.
And $385 million EBITDA headwind for 2025. This is not a small bruise. This is a huge immediate shock to their whole system.
It absolutely is. When investors look at Viatris today, what they're watching really is the timeline for fixing this.
Yeah.
For remediation. Management says progress is on track.
Right.
And they're working with the FDA for reinspection. But until that alert is lifted and those supply channels are back to normal, the stock is just going to trade under this heavy cloud.
That lack of supply chain visibility is a massive drag.
A huge drag.
And this internal operational struggle, it's made worse by skepticism about their long-term ability to innovate. Investor appetite, I think the sources called it fairly cool.
I was putting it mildly. They just haven't seen enough, eye-catching product launches over the last couple of years to feel confident that Viatris can stabilize and grow after they fix Indore.
And that skepticism was not helped by a recent clinical setback.
No, it definitely was not. That was back in July 2025. Viatris was counting on some growth from their innovative pipeline, And their phase 3 study of a drug called MR-139 for blepharitis, it failed. It failed to meet its primary endpoints. This just reinforced that whole market narrative that their progress toward innovation, toward being future-proof, has just been too slow, especially since ophthalmology is supposed to be one of their key growth areas.
So we have the core business suffering from constant price erosion,
Low to mid-single digits year after year.
major short-term operational hurdles, and a recent failure in R&D. The company obviously knows it can't just survive selling easy-to-make generic pills.
No.
And that brings us to their big survival strategy, the strategic pivot.
This strategy is truly Viatris's bet on its own future, and they are funneling resources into two main avenues.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first is a huge shift toward what they call complex generics. This is where they spend 3/4 of their entire R&D budget. The idea is to move away from those simple, small molecule oral pills.
The ones anyone can make.
The ones anyone with a basic facility can churn out, exactly. And instead focus on forms that are much, much harder to manufacture.
How much harder are we talking? What really makes a generic complex?
Think about the manufacturing barriers. So complex generics would include things like injectables, inhalers, or other complex formulations that need highly specialized equipment and much stricter sterility controls.
Right.
An injectable, for instance, it requires a dedicated aseptic manufacturing line. That costs exponentially more than a basic tablet press.
So fewer companies can even get in the game.
Precisely. The market is limited, competition is lower, and because of that, pricing power and margins are significantly better.
Right.
This is what they call their opportunistic road, leveraging their massive existing infrastructure.
But wait a minute, isn't chasing complex generics just, I don't know, inviting a slower death, a slower form of price erosion? If Viatris proves it's a lucrative market, won't their big competitors just follow them, maybe with a 2 or 3 year delay?
That is the exact question that underlies that very high uncertainty rating.
Right.
They have to execute flawlessly and innovate constantly. Which brings us to the second part of their pivot, which is designed to help them escape that generic treadmill altogether. Focusing on specialty branded products, they've identified 3 key areas.
Ophthalmology, dermatology, and gastroenterology.
Exactly.
Why those 3 specifically?
It's a very smart business model choice. These are specialty-driven fields. That means Viatris doesn't need this huge, expensive primary care sales force.
Going to every doctor's office in the country.
Right. They can use a smaller, highly targeted, very effective sales team to reach the handful of prescribing specialists in these areas. And crucially, these markets generally don't have one single dominant leader to displace. So Viatris can use strategic tuck-in acquisitions to gain share pretty quickly.
And we've seen this in action already, most clearly in their eye care division.
Oh, you have?
The 2023 acquisitions of Oyster Point Pharma and Famy Life Sciences, that's what established that division and brought in some really key assets.
Exactly. And look at the products. Tyrvaya, which was the first and only nasal spray approved for dry eye disease when it launched, and Razumvi, used to reverse pharmacologically induced mydriasis.
These are differentiated, specialized solutions, not commodities.
Complete opposites. They address niche but profitable patient needs, which is the exact opposite of the problem they face with simple generic tablets.
This whole shift toward complexity and specialization is so critical because, as the analysts state, Viatris has no moat. And to really get why, you have to look outside Viatris and at the structure of the U.S. generics industry itself.
The system is designed to crush pricing power.
A two-pronged assault, really.
It is. First, you've got the regulatory environment. The erosion of pricing power really started with the 1984 Hatch-Waxman Act, which, codified and sped up the approval path for generics.
And then came GDUFA.
Decades later, yes.
Oh!
Congress passed the Generic Drug User Fee Amendments, or GDUFA.
GDUFA sounds super technical. What's the practical impact on a company like Viatris?
GDUFA is basically the FDA's speed-up fund. It lets the FDA collect fees from drug makers specifically to expedite the generic approval process.
And the result?
The result is that the FDA has recently been averaging about 1,000 abbreviated new drug application, or ANDA, approvals per year.
1,000.
1,000 new competitors entering the market annually. Imagine that. That constant flood of competition guarantees immediate and profound price destruction for any simple generic Viatris is selling.
So the government's own structure is actively promoting this race to the bottom on price. But the second part of the assault is distribution power, which is maybe even more aggressive.
This is where the pricing pressure becomes almost irresistible. We're talking about these powerful generic sourcing groups that have formed joint ventures.
Between wholesalers and drug purchasers.
Yes, specifically to aggregate their buying power.
Give us some examples of how big this consolidation really is.
Well, you have entities like Clarisone, that's McKesson and Walmart combined,
Huh.
or Red Oak Sourcing, a joint venture between Cardinal Health and CVS. These massive groups exist for one reason: to centralize demand.
And they control how much the market.
They now collectively purchase about 80% of all generics sold in the U.S.
80%. Imagine trying to negotiate your price when your customer is a consortium that controls 4/5 of your entire market.
That aggregated power lets them demand huge buy-side discounts and rebates. It ensures that consistent, low to mid single-digit price erosion hits Viatris's profits every single year, no matter how efficient they become.
And yet, despite navigating that intense headwind, Viatris's financial stability is seen as, what, adequate?
Generally, yes. They have a standard capital allocation rating. Their debt is high because of the merger, but management seems to be disciplined and very focused on shareholder returns.
And they are backing that up with action. Viatris has maintained a consistent dividend, 48 cents per share since 2022. And their stated goal is to return about half of their annual free cash flow to shareholders. Plus, they guided for a pretty significant share buyback program for 2025.
And this whole strategy is being overseen by the new CEO, Scott Smith, who came in around April 2023. He brings decades of biotech and pharma experience to the table.
So we ultimately circle all the way back to where we started. Viatris is fundamentally a small value stock, but that value is just completely eclipsed by this very high uncertainty.
Its long-term viability is entirely contingent on executing this pivot. They have to successfully shift toward complex generics and specialty areas like eye care, and they had to do it fast enough to offset that guaranteed price erosion in their legacy businesses.
They are definitely in a trough year. The 2025 guidance project sales will decline 7%, EPS by 14%.
Largely because of that $500 million hit from the Indore facility.
Right. But the good news, I guess, is that management expects those figures to land at the high end of the range, and analysts predict both sales and earnings should return to growth in 2026.
That's the hope.
But let's zoom out for our final thought. If the entire generics market is fundamentally structured by aggressive regulation like GDUFA and the overwhelming power of sourcing consortiums like Clarisone to prevent any company from building an economic moat, it forces a really fundamental question for you, the listener. How long can Viatris truly rely on complex formulations and tuck-in specialty acquisitions before its major competitors inevitably follow the exact same path, simply resetting the price erosion clock every few years? Does the very nature of this industry mean Viatris is doomed to a perpetual high uncertainty fight for margin? That's the long-term risk this pivot has to overcome.